Hello everybody, hopefully you guys are having a good day. My name is Eddie, welcome back to the channel. I'm going to be doing another one of my stand-up videos where I kind of do some coding, explain a feature that I've made, and go through my thought process. Hope you guys have been liking it. It seems like you guys have been, so I'm really happy about that. Super stoked. Let's get into it, but before we do, please remember to like the video if you liked it. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions or suggestions. And subscribe. That's the last thing. So yeah, let's get into it. And I took some feedback from my last video. People were saying that the screen sizing was a little bit wonky, and I tend to agree with them. I did some testing, and this seems to be pretty good. I need to put this all the way up to 200% zoom for it to work on my 4K monitor. But in this one, I've also kind of been looking at how you guys interact with these videos, what really, keeps your guys' attention, and it seems like doing the feature and then just kind of going over it afterwards is a lot better than going and having a bunch of like fast forwards and just a bunch of dead time where I'm just sitting there coding. So I think I'm gonna continue to do it this way. But going into that, we've kind of had our first blocker. So this is actually starting to feel like a real stand-up, not just like a video series. We have our first blocker. I'm blocked, guys. Yeah, what ended up happening was that I really didn't have an understanding of what a kubeconfig file is. And let's see if I can go into the shell here, clear this out. Cat kubeconfig. So if you kind of look at what a kubeconfig is a bunch of different arrays to kind of look at it, right? So we have this cluster array, and we have this context array, and we have this users array. And it wasn't really apparent to me when I first look at it, right? Because I only have one item in these arrays, but I could have more than one thing inside of my cluster. And when I think about it, yeah, I can. What I was doing before is I would just come in here and I would give it a configuration file, right? But it's not really just that configuration file. I also need the certificate authority, my key file for my user, and my cert file. I need all those things to kind of make a valid connection to the Kubernetes API. So it was just a fundamental misunderstanding. And what it clicked to me was when I'm looking at this context and what it really is a context is a user, something coming from down here, and a cluster, something coming from up here, right? So it's going and it's saying we have a cluster and we have a user. Let's combine those things together to make a connection. So in this feature, what I ended up having to do is kind of add all these certificate files and make that model, or add that to the model in our Kubernetes API. So if you look at our data, now we're taking in that CA file, the key file, and the cert file all into our requests, and we're also storing those into our database. Right. And I don't think I really need to go into it, but yeah, I added some form fields. You can imagine I added some validations into Zod, did a bunch of stuff on the front end, but I don't really want to focus too much on the front end in this feature video. So let's continue on. I really just want to look at this new route that we got. So we get all of that data into our database, and now how can we actually use it? Now, initially, my idea was I'm just going to use the Kubernetes official library to do stuff. But I was having issues because the official library requires me to give path to files for that CA cert, the CA file, and the certificate file. My certificate authority, my encryption key file, and my certificate file. It wants paths, not strings that I'm grabbing from the database. And that was an issue for me because I was like, a bunch of people are going to be hitting this microservice. I don't want to be storing files on the microservice. And then what if, you're hitting one server and then the next request you hit another server? This is going to get really confusing really quickly. So I didn't want to do it that way. So then I started looking into just hitting the Kubernetes API manually, right? The Kubernetes and kubectl. If I go, kubectl cluster info, let me erase that for a second, right? All I'm actually doing is, and if I do that, hit that v6, what I'm actually doing is getting some config files. It's grabbing that CA cert file and all that stuff, and then it's hitting an API endpoint, right? It's just making a request, the same thing we do with our platform front end, and everything that we all do on the internet is just REST APIs. There's other ways of doing this, and we're probably going to get into it once we do more advanced stuff in this series, things like messenger queues and things like that, things that I really do want to get into, but I kind of want to do it this way first and then start seeing where I can make those kinds of optimizations later. But down to the nitty gritty, that is what we're doing here. We're just making API requests to an API that is the Kubernetes control plane. So if we go back here, what I ended up trying to do, I tried to do that same thing, right? Grab that thing as a string, and then I wanted to pass it in to this area, this load cert chain and load verify locations. Now, I was under the impression, because you could read this signature, and it says that I could take a string or a byte path. So I was really under the impression that I was going to be able to get around the problems I was having with kubeconfig, or the kubectl library for Python. Thought I was going to be able to get around that by doing this, because I thought I would just be able to set the cert, set the key file, give it this certificate authority, and then I would just be able to make my request, and Kubernetes would read that and say, yes, you are authorized, I bestow upon you the data that you're looking for. But sadly, that isn't what ended up happening, and I was blocked, and I had to kind of rethink how I was going to be doing this feature. And what I went with is using the temp file library in Python, and what that allows me to do is just create a temp file and then delete that temp file once I'm done with it. So this is a context manager in Python, the with keyword, and what it ends up doing is for the duration of this block, we're going to do something, and then once we're out of this block, once we successfully leave this block, or if we error out in this block, I want you to go and do something else. And that something else, for the context of the temp file, context manager, right? That's what we're doing here. For the context of a temp file is we want you to create a temp file, and once you're done, I want you to delete that temp file. And we create that cert temp, that key temp, and that CA temp. So now we have 3 temp files inside of this with block, and we write to them, we make sure that they're saved, and once all of that is done, we can create those SSL contexts, the keys that we're going to use to make our API request. And then we just do the same thing we've been doing, the way that our Kubernetes API makes a request over to our authentication API, the same way that it does all of that stuff. We go ahead and we do it here, but in this case, we do it over to our Kubernetes cluster. Now, this is all very rough, and I'm definitely going to be cleaning this up and probably changing it. I'm probably even going to be switching back now that I have all this information to the Kubernetes library. But if we look here, let's see if I refresh this somehow. No. All right, well, I'm just gonna make the request and send it, and there we go. We have all of that data about the cluster. We have information on the nodes, images that we have on the cluster, pretty much everything that we want. And this is all protected data. I shouldn't be able to see this unless my certificate is getting verified at the certificate authority level and also on the cluster. So the cluster knows that I'm an authenticated user. It's grabbing that data from our database. Oh man, grabbing that data from our user, right? We have all of our keys in here and our kube config, so it's grabbing the data from here. You can see here, we're doing a query for a kube config. Right now we're just getting the only one in there. And we're setting it all from that data from our database, and then we're making an API request to Kubernetes. So we're getting a lot closer to actually being able to do stuff with our service. 10 episodes, 7, 8 episodes deep, and we're finally there. I'm gonna leave it at that for today because honestly, I'm really tired. Most of today was just spent reading a lot of documentation. I've learned a lot more about TLS and SSLs and certificate authorities that I care to admit today. I'm tired, so I'm gonna go and get some sleep. You guys have a good one. Please remember, if you like this kind of content, hit that like button. If you have any suggestions at all, I read through all of them. So leave those comments down below and subscribe to see what is up next. See you guys. Love you all. Have a good day.